Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this joint meeting of the Health and Human Services Committees of the House and the Senate to order. I want to thank the senators that have come very much. Thank you for showing an interest in this issue and coming. Your chairman is, Senator Unterman, is held up in a meeting, but she's coming as soon as that meeting is over. Thank you to everybody that's showing an interest in this. Come on, Senator. You're holding it up. My seatmate for how many years? And you know, to start it off, I had to listen to that all the time. So anyway, so let's go ahead and get started with this joint meeting, and I'm going to call on Russell Allen to do the introduction overview. He's the president and CEO of Georgia Bio. So, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, representatives and senators, and for inviting us here today to talk about an important issue for the health of Georgians. I'm here to represent Georgia Bio. Georgia Bio is the industry association for healthcare-related companies in biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, medical device, health IT, and related products and services. We have about 200 member organizations, including those companies, research universities, our state colleges, and product and service companies who serve this industry. Our mission as an organization is pretty simple, and that's getting product to patients. Our companies are developing innovative therapies and treatments, and our job is to help ensure that we can bring those products ultimately to our patients to improve and save lives. So we also work on behalf of our members to ensure that we have strong policies and programs in place in Georgia so that those companies can succeed here, can grow here, and ultimately commercialize their product. We are proud to call many of our innovative Georgia companies members of Georgia Bio, and many of those are here today to help represent us. We have a particular topic that we're going to cover today, and as you can see from the slide from our first speaker who will come up in a moment, that topic is biologics and the substitution of innovator biologics with their interchangeable counterparts. We're going to explain what that means through these panelists. So we have the pleasure of having the perspective of our national partner, the Biotechnology Industry Organization, a biologic and biosimilar manufacturing organization, advocate and patient and physician. So you're going to get many perspectives on this issue, which is how a biosimilar, when it is approved by the FDA, how it will ultimately get to the patient and how the communication of that substitution occurs. So I'd like to introduce Kim Greco. Kim is with the, I mentioned the manufacturing organization, Amgen. Many of you have heard of Amgen. They are based in California, but have a strong presence throughout the world. So Kim will give us an overview of biologics.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today about biologics and biosimilars. As was mentioned, I am from Amgen, and Amgen is an innovative biotechnology company. But what's important to note is that a few years ago, we decided to make biosimilars, that is, copies of other people's innovative medicines. And that's important because from a policy perspective, it means that we have to consider the issues as to how they will affect innovators as well as how they will affect making copies of these medicines. Many people have wondered, well, what is a biotech medicine? And I wanted to touch on that a little bit because these medicines have really revolutionized the care of patients who are suffering from many diseases. These include cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, you name it. If it's a serious condition, generally speaking, biotech medicines treat these diseases. So these don't tend to be passing conditions. They tend to be ones that our patients really struggle with and grapple with. Now, the difference between biotech medicines and a traditional medicine is really important, and it's the reason we're here today. And the science of biotechnology is fundamentally based in the cell. And the idea is the medicine is generated not by a factory, but actually by a little cell. And that cell, we essentially then harvest the medicine that is generated by that cell. And so when you think about manufacturing medicines, it's not a simple process. You really have to manage the cells in a very careful way. And that sensitivity of those living cells really guides the policies that when we talk about biotech medicines and bringing them to patients, that's a fundamental consideration. I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. So as you see here, there are a range of sizes of molecules, and that's significant for a variety of reasons. On the far right-hand side is a complex biotechnology medicine, a monoclonal antibody. On the other end is essentially an aspirin, a chemical drug. And the difference between the two, it's a bit like the difference between, say, a Lego model and a tangled ball of yarn. And you can look at a Lego model and you can say, aha, I know how to make that. And you look at a tangled ball of yarn and you think, I'm not sure how I'd duplicate that because it's so complex and it is, its structure is very large and tangled and not at all easily laid out or evaluated. This is important because, for several reasons. One, it's difficult to know when you've made an identical copy. So if you've got the Lego model version, you can look at it and say, are all the pieces in the right place? But if you've got the tangled ball of yarn, you're going to have a tough time knowing if all the twists and turns are in the same place. And so that's sort of the difference in the biotech medicine versus the chemical drug. It's size, its complexity, and it's also sensitivity to the manufacturing process. Again, they're made in living cells. And those three elements distinguish chemical drugs and biotech medicines for purposes of regulating them when FDA approves these medicines. But for our purposes today, when we think about this legislation or these issues, it's really about how do you make a copy and how do you safely regulate it? And the size, the complexity, and the sensitivity to manufacturing all come into play. So the difference between chemical drugs and biotechnology medicines, something that Congress long recognized and in fact have regulated these two categories of products differently over the years. And when we talk about a biosimilar, we use the word similar as opposed to a biogeneric for a very specific reason. Generics are identical copies of the chemical drug that was the originator. And when you want to make a copy, you can do it identically. You know that the chemical structure is the same. But with biotech medicines, because they are made in living cells, you really have to rely on the cell to do all of the work. And so, in fact, it is not identical. It is similar and highly similar, but it will not be identical. And so in light of that, you have to consider how to do it differently, how to make sure it's close enough. And that's FDA's burden. It's not the state burden. But FDA is required to look at this and say, is it close enough that it will be safe and effective? And we believe FDA will do this. They have the capacity, the skill set, et cetera. So no question, it's a challenge, but they will be able to do this. The question is, how similar will they be? And Congress established two different categories of similarity. They said you can be similar, meaning you're safe and effective. You're in that category of medicine. But are you so similar that if we swapped out these medicines, you wouldn't know it, your body wouldn't know it? And that second category is called interchangeable. And so Congress said, we want you, FDA, to evaluate whether a product is similar, meaning safe and effective, it can be used for the same, same purposes, or it's so similar it can be swapped out, which is essentially what we experience with generic drugs. Two different kinds, two different levels of evaluation that FDA puts forward on these products. Again, they'll both be safe and effective. It's just what can you do, or how can you expect the patient to react? The reason that we're here today to talk to you about this is because the federal government and the state government each have a role to play in keeping medicines safe and effective for patients. FDA will make the scientific judgment as to whether a product is safe to be on the market and whether it gets what we refer to as the gold star, whether it's interchangeable. But ultimately, it comes down to the state to decide what those designations mean. The state regulates what pharmacists can do and what physicians can do. And so ultimately, you all will decide what those designations mean, what it means for a product to be biosimilar, and what it means for a product to be interchangeable. So the National Biotech Association established 5 principles, and the gentleman who will speak after me will go into detail on these 5 principles about what it takes to ensure that substitution of a biotech medicine can happen safely. And I'd like to take a quick step back. So biotech medicines are really quite amazing. They have revolutionized the care for patients suffering from many terrible diseases. But sort of like a car, it's a great invention, but unless we have the rules in place to use those inventions correctly, what could be a great invention could actually be a real problem. So the fact that we all agree on what stop signs mean, what stoplights mean, et cetera, means we can use cars safely. Well, when we talk about biotech medicines, we need to think about what are the rules that we have to put in place to ensure that these can be used safely. We don't put in place the same rules for cars that we do for boats because those are different mechanisms for traveling. Similarly, for biotech medicines and for chemical drugs, we need to think about them differently because the science is different. And so it's not that they're good or bad or one's better or worse than the other. It's just that the rules need to be adapted to what is the science that governs these medicines. So with regard to thinking about how can you substitute biotech medicines safely, the national organization put in place 5 principles. 4 of those principles track directly to the generic drug policies. So you say, what laws do we have in place for generic drugs? Generally speaking, doctors can say, I don't want it substituted. They can say you must keep a record. There are only certain products that can be substituted if it's considered AB rated, if it's interchangeable as a generic drug. And pharmacies must maintain records. So all of these things are in place for generic drugs, and we've adopted those to say that that should apply in the case of biotech medicines. But because of the character of biotech medicines, there's one additional principle that we believe should be in place to ensure that if these medicines are substituted, that such substitution, when permitted, is done safely. And that additional step really is a communication from the pharmacy to the prescriber to say, hey, by the way, this is the medicine that your patient got, so that the record is accurate. Because think about it, if a physician prescribes a medicine for a patient and then a different product is dispensed, if there's a problem, the physician isn't going to know who to go back to and say, hey, there's a problem. The reason that this is important is because, as I mentioned, biotech molecules are made from living cells, so they're very sensitive to the manufacturing process. They are very sensitive to how they're handled. They're large, which means that your immune system will see them. So if, for instance, those twists and turns in that tangled ball of yarn are a little bit different, your immune system may see that and say, this medicine is not helpful, it's actually the enemy, and it will work to remove that. And so what could have been a helpful medicine is actually now a problem. So size, complexity, again, we can't be sure that they're identical. So those factors make it important that we pay attention from start to finish. Now, what is a real challenge here as a manufacturer is we want to make sure that the medicines that we provide to patients are safe and effective and that there are no problems. But in the manufacturing process, there are always changes that go on. And with biotech medicines, because these are made in living cells, it's a bit like making wine. And you know, the year matters when you make wine. The weather may change the grape, the soil may change the grape, etc., and the quality of the ultimate wine is different. Well, we work very hard to make sure that all the elements are identical, but you know, it turns out that suppliers go out of business, raw materials become unavailable, etc. So changes happen. And so as a manufacturer, you have to adapt to this, you have to deal with it. So we attempt to be very, very conscientious, and we believe that FDA will do the right thing, we believe manufacturers will be responsible, but it's very possible that something could go awry. And that if that happens, as a manufacturer, we want to make sure that we are able to take responsibility for our product, to minimize any harm that comes to any patient, and to minimize the exposure of patients. So we need to identify the problem very quickly. And that's why accurate records are important from start to finish, at every point in the process. And the point that you all have control over really is at the point of prescribing and dispensing. You get to decide what that looks like. And so we're here to say that we think it's very important that the communication happen between physician and pharmacist, that if there is a product dispensed and there's an interchangeable available, that communication happens so the patient record is accurate. And here we show the potential gap in the communication process. The time when the records are ambiguous would be if there is an interchangeable product on the market. If you permit pharmacists to do an automatic substitution of a product, which is a reasonable thing to do, it leaves the medical record ambiguous. And so what we suggest is that you close that loop and make sure that the record is accurate. An example of why this is important, in 1999-2000, Amgen was selling medicines in Europe, and there was a problem, and we had just brought a new product onto the market. And there were some patients getting ill, and they thought, aha, you're the new person on the market, so it must be your product. Turns out it wasn't our product, but it took 18 months to figure out what was going on, what product was responsible, etc. That's too long. It should be that we can close that system and figure out what product is responsible so that we minimize the harm to patients, that we control all the pieces where we can. So again, as manufacturers, we're looking to be accountable and to be responsible, and the only way we can do that is if we know, if a patient is having problems on a medicine, that we know if it's our product. If it's not our product, we can't solve the problem. So even if the report comes to me, I can't make the product better. Similarly, if I don't get the report, I don't know I have a problem to solve. Thank you. 8 states have passed laws along these lines allowing for substitution and have included provisions addressing the issue of communication between the pharmacist and the physician. So I want to just summarize very quickly by saying this bill is really about how do we increase access to products that are going to be on the market in a way that is thoughtful and responsible. How do we make sure that what are really pretty miraculous medicines, how do we put in place the rules that make sure those inventions can be helpful and are not used in a way that create additional challenges? So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, either now or later.
I think we have time for one or two from committee members only, please. And I think, Senator, if you want to join us up here, you need a seat. You okay? Do we have a question? Representative Broderick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just this question, in this communication timeline, what are those states done where there is a payer-defined product selection? Payer, what we're seeing now in the outside hepatitis C drugs, is certain payers are selecting certain products. Is the payer-defined product in the communication, have they written that into their policy?
So as far as I know, there have been no specifications with regard to payers, but the specification is if the prescription that's written is not what is dispensed. So it, generally speaking, the vast majority of biotech medicines are distributed through channels where the physician administers them. So this isn't a big issue. The collection of products that we're looking at are a fairly small collection of them, although over time it will increase. And the focus is on if there's an interchangeable one and there's an opportunity for substitution, then the communication should happen, regardless of whether that substitution happens at the decision of the pharmacist independently or as directed by the payer.
Another question? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much, Ms. Greco. All right, and Patrick, I remember how to pronounce the last name, Plus? Pardon? Plus? Okay. Thank you very much. Patrick is going to give us a national perspective. He's the Senior Director of State Government Relations for the bio industry.
Yeah, I think it should be up here. If not, I can just speak. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Plews. I'm Senior Director for State Government Affairs at BIO. BIO is the National Trade Association. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we represent the entire spectrum of the biotechnology industry. The bulk of our members are in the healthcare space, but we also represent food and ag interests as well as environment and industrial interests. So we like to say that we heal, feed, and fuel the world at BIO. And in Georgia, we work very closely in close partnership with the Georgia Bio. You have in the state of Georgia a very, very good biotech association, and we're proud to call them a partner with us, not only in this piece of legislation, but in a number of issues that we work across the state of Georgia. So thank you for having me here this afternoon. I want to reiterate a few things that my colleague Kim had mentioned, just because this issue is very important, and it's very important that you understand the terminology that's used, the differences between biologics and the three different types of biologics that will be eventually on the market. As Kim mentioned, this legislation that will be that is before you and before the legislature deals with lower cost biologics that will be coming on the market very soon. There are right now on the market brand name biologics. We refer to those as reference products. The FDA is now looking at biosimilars, which will be lower cost, similar products to the reference product. And eventually the FDA will approve an interchangeable biologic product. So there's three sort of columns: there's the reference or the branded, the biosimilar, and then the interchangeable. And just think of the interchangeable as sort of a biosimilar plus. As Kim had mentioned, that's going to be the product that most closely resembles the reference or branded product. And the legislation before you is very specific that substitution should only occur with the interchangeable product. Kim had mentioned to you, I think she obviously went into a lot more detail on what those products are, so I'm not going to belabor that point. I also want to be very clear. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Almost there. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. talk about an interchangeable. I also want to mention that, a lot of, you're going to hear opponents of this legislation say that the timing is not right for biosimilars legislation. I'm here to tell you that the timing is right. The FDA is looking at this issue very closely. They're issuing guidance. They issued 6 pieces of guidance in 2014. We're expecting another 4 pieces of FDA guidance this coming year to address this issue of biosimilars. The FDA right now has a biosimilars under review, and we expect that product to be on the market in mid-2015. So they are right around the corner. So we implore state legislatures, such as yourself, to get this legislation on the books sooner rather than later. And one of the simple facts is Georgians will not be able to, it will be harder for Georgians to have access to interchangeable biologics until this legislation is on the books. Because this legislation will allow for a substitution to occur, which will make it easier for patients to get these lower cost, very safe, very effective treatment options. And at Bio, we are a trade association. I think Kim went over why. It's a state issue. States have control over pharmacy practice guidelines. So states have a very important part to play in how these products are dispensed at the pharmacy level. And another distinction I want to make about this legislation is we are talking about a very small subset of biologic products. Most biologic products are physician administered and would not fall under this legislation. This legislation only pertains to biologic products that are dispensed at the retail pharmacy, which is a very, very small percentage of product. According to some of the data that we have, we're talking roughly 3 products a week will be hitting a pharmacy that this legislation would impact. At Bio, we spent many years developing 5 principles on substitution. And I want to be very clear that when we develop these principles, we do represent mostly the branded manufacturers, but these principles are also agreed to by the non-branded manufacturers, and it's very rare that the brands and the brands and the generics actually get together on an issue. And this is one issue where we are all speaking from one voice and agree on these 5 principles in legislation. So the first is very important. The substitution, the physician should still have control of what the patient receives. So the prescriber, whether it be a physician, nurse practitioner, should be able to, on the script, be able to write dispensed as written, and the patient should have that product dispensed to them. The substitution should only occur, and this is very important. Once again, this goes back to the different levels of a biosimilar. The substitution should only occur with the interchangeable. Once again, you have the reference or the branded, the biosimilar, and then you're going to have that one step up, the interchangeable, which is going to most closely resemble the reference or branded product. This is a very important distinction. Third, the patient should be notified of that substitution. It's natural that the patient should know what the patient's getting. A record of that substitution must be kept by the pharmacy and the physician for a set period of time. And then the final principle, which is probably one of the key principles that we hope and would like and would require in legislation, is that there needs to be some communication between the pharmacist and the prescriber so that everybody that's involved in that patient's health understand the course of treatment that patient is on. These are very complex medicines. They're also treating very complex diseases and conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, hematological disorders. So it's very important that everybody who's taking care of that patient, from the pharmacist to the physician, know exactly the product that patient is on. And just some context, we have, as Kim had noticed, we have worked this legislation in 8 other states last year. We are we're working with legislatures in 15 other states in 2015 to make sure that this, what we believe is a very safe and important substitution law, is put into law in many states to provide for a transparent patient record. So with that, I will entertain questions.
Time for 1 or 2 questions from committee members. No questions? Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Grimman, you would come forward. He is Director of State Legislative Affairs for the Arthritis Foundation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Guyman. I'm with the Arthritis Foundation, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the 50 million people in this country with doctor-diagnosed arthritis. You might be wondering, why is the arthritis taking a position on a very hard biotechnology issue? And I'm going to present the perspective of patients and advocacy efforts on behalf of those with arthritis as it translates into biologics. I was at a conference this summer, if you want to understand biologics, and 30 years ago we had our juvenile arthritis conference, and just about every child in the room was either in a wheelchair or had braces or was using crutches. And we had our 30th anniversary this year, and I looked at a picture comparing them, and with about 700 children, there were 3 in wheelchairs, and that was it. And the difference that this has made is biologic medications. It's made a huge difference for everyone. We want to make sure that there's a pathway available for biologics, but the problem with biologics is they're extremely complex, and with that complexity comes cost. Your average biologic for a single medication may be as high as $2,500 on a monthly basis. We are looking from the Arthritis Foundation perspective, our patients and all of the other organizations that I could speak for but don't actually today, that we need these medications, and if they're available for market in a cheaper way, we could be looking at a 20, 30, 40% reduction in the cost of biologics. For an individual or even a family, this can be a huge savings for them. And the issue of affordability is not just out of pocket what they're going to save. It also goes to things such as medical adherence. If somebody can afford their medications, they will stay on them. In arthritis in particular, as I said, it is a chronic, debilitating, crippling disease. If somebody doesn't take their medications, they don't just suddenly get better. They stop taking their medications, they almost instantly go into remission or out of remission, and they're in a bad situation. And that leads to things like hospitalizations. And a hospitalization is probably going to be 8 to 10 times more than the cost of the medications would have been. So we want to make sure that people have access to the medications initially, but they adhere in their regimen and stay with those medications. I think one of the things I'd like to impart today for everyone is a distinction between a biologic and a regular medication. 100% of biologics are either injected or infused, IV infused. This is not going over to your retail pharmacy, your corner pharmacist, and saying, I'd like just a little medication to make me feel better. This is a highly complex medication that involves patient education, special handling, special shipping, all kinds of things done separately that would not be done with a standard medication that you might just get over the counter or with a standard prescription. One of our concerns is we want to see that there is a communication requirement with the prescriber or the physician about which interchangeable biologic comes along. And the reason is, in that special handling, because these are such complex specialty medications, if something goes wrong in the process, somebody may have an adverse reaction. It may not be the medication itself. It may be the shipping and handling or some other factor. But unless the physician knows what's happening with the medication, it leaves that empty spot in the entire complete patient record. I think it's important to note, too, that a lot of these specialty medications, biologics, are shipped from out-of-state pharmacies. So if there is an adverse reaction, the physician's going to be dealing with a patient, perhaps somebody with juvenile arthritis, and try to figure out where in this country this medication came from. This might be an emergency situation, and they need to know, and if it's not there, it's not there. The Arthritis Foundation has taken the position that this communication is essential. It creates a complete pharmacy record, but it also creates a complete medical record, and the two need to be joined together for patient care. They said arthritis is crippling and debilitating. People cannot walk. They can't get out of bed. It even causes blindness. This is not something like switching out a cholesterol medication. This is serious medicine with serious problems and consequences. The concern that we have in the long term is biologics, biosimilars, are not yet in the marketplace. And we might not have been so strongly in favor of legislation a year ago as we are today. But the FDA is moving quickly. The first biosimilar is in the approval process in the final phase right now. There are several others in the pipeline. This is going to be our reality, and it's going to be your reality and your constituents' reality. People are going to be having biosimilars in the next year, 2 years, continually. And that robust marketplace is only going to increase over time. So the concern at this point today, say we have biologic X, and the biosimilar comes on, and it's biosimilar 2, or biologic number 2. Maybe it's easier to track that down, which medication was biosimilar, which was not. When we start getting into biosimilar 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how do we backtrack into that system and make sure that we know exactly what it was that somebody took? And it may not be a bad medication. It may in fact be a bad medication. Now, these are not exact as to the original product, but they're pretty close. But if there's a minor deviation and something happens, the physician should have that information to know exactly what that person was taking. So we fully support a communication requirement. Our position is after the point of dispensing within 48 hours as an absolute maximum. And I would pose the question to you, why is this significant? Why should you support the communication requirement? And I would ask, if it was your spouse or your loved one or even your child, and they were getting a biosimilar that maybe hadn't been in the marketplace, it wasn't that thoroughly tested yet, it didn't have a history, would you want your doctor not to know about that, or would you want your doctor to know about that? If it was my child, I would want my doctor, her doctor, to know what medication was being taken, how much was given, and if there was an adverse outcome, exactly what it was that caused that. So I thank you, and I open myself up to questions.
Okay, time for a couple of questions. I have one. Did I understand that one of the companies making a biosimilar or maybe the biologic actually started having problems? They were tracking problems. The patients were not getting the success that they had, and they traced it back to the fact that they had changed a stopper on a bottle that was housing the bio.
I've heard stories anecdotally about things such as that. I would leave that to the
I don't want to call the
Biotech
company.
folks.
It did happen that they're that sensitive to change. It did happen. I just didn't want to call them. Sorry.
I have heard a lot of stories about people with complications due to shipping and handling and simple things like that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Kerry Tucker, who is a patient advocate and a patient herself.
Hi, my name is Kerry Tucker. I am almost 50 years old, and I have spent over half my life suffering from debilitating arthritis. I'm not a regular speaker, but I'm delighted to be here to share my story if I can help others with this disease. Approximately 1 in 4 Georgians suffer from some form of arthritis. 2/3 of those in Georgia are under the age of 65. That amazes me. That indicates to me that this is not an elderly disease. This is not just a disease that affects athletes. It affects somebody that we know. Everybody knows someone with arthritis. And too many young children suffer from juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. They as early as taking their first steps. Many suffering do so in silence. You can't always tell when you see a person that they suffer from this disease. I was in my early 20s when my knees started to swell. It was extremely painful. I felt like my body was out of control. I could not manage it with over-the-counter drugs. And I went to my physicians, and they were very quick with the diagnosis. So at 24 years old, I was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, a cousin of rheumatoid arthritis. I was devastated to learn at that age that this was a battle I was going to fight for the rest of my life. Stress makes my disease worse. I was a practicing CPA. I had to quit my job because of the long hours and the deadlines. At that time, back in the 90s, I was taking drugs that were supposed to slow the progression of the disease, but they made me sick, headaches, nausea. I was also told these drugs were going to interfere with my fertility, and I wanted to have a family. Back then, steroids were the safe choice, but they were not a long-term solution. After the birth of my first child, my rheumatologist introduced me to biologic medicine. What a game changer. Finally, a drug that had no side effects, that reduced my inflammation, gave me energy. I was able to exercise again, Exercise saves my life. Daily, I get out there to exercise, and it helps me be in control of my disease. My quality of life has improved dramatically. I've been taking a biologic medicine for 15 years. Most people that see me don't realize that I suffer from this disease. Many that know me don't realize that I have it either. I hide it well, but not a day goes by that I don't know that I have arthritis. But I'm living with arthritis, and I'm succeeding because of these amazing drugs. Yesterday, I went for a 20-mile bike ride on the Silver Comet Path. Last night, I sat on the floor and read a book to my daughter, and I cooked dinner for my family. Some things that people take for granted, but I don't, because when I'm in pain, it's very humbling. Living with arthritis affects me mentally as well as physically, and it affects my whole family. As a wife and mother, I think that I am the caretaker. This isn't always possible. I have flare-ups, even under the control of these medications. I was blessed with 3 beautiful, healthy children, and I want to be involved in everything they do. I want to grow old with my husband and continue those bike rides. And this is where biologic medicine helps me and is changing lives. And fortunately, I've had access to them. My biologics currently cost me $1,300 a month, and I have good health insurance. I want patients that can't afford this option to find hope and relief with the biosimilars. Because of my access and excellent physician care, I have hope that there will be a future without pain. I have hope that there'll be a future that my arthritis will be in remission. My story is not complete unless I tell you how much I depend on my physician. I've been a patient of my current rheumatologist for 25 years. She is my lifeline. She gives thoughtful, compassionate, careful oversee of my care. She knows everything about me. Whatever the future holds, I know that my health will be overseen by this physician and her staff. In order for my physician to have a complete medical record on me, there must be communication between my pharmacist and my physician. I have concerns for my safety when I take this high-powered, complex medicine that we're all talking about here. This is a medicine that is not physician administered to me. I give myself a very painful injection weekly. It's a bit frightening. I would not want to have an adverse reaction to a substitution. Communication about substitution must be made between my pharmacist and physician. Biologic medicines are now proven to help so many adults and children suffering from these diseases. It's exciting that biosimilars will be a lower-cost alternative and allow patients to have access and to experience reduced symptoms and healing. But with that comes the responsibility of our lawmakers, our pharmaceutical companies, our physicians, and our pharmacists to put the patient's safety first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerry, for coming and telling us your story, and I'm certainly glad that the biologics have made your life different. We have Dr. Weissman now, Jamie Weissman. She is one of the doctors practicing here in the metro area. Thank you for being a Georgia physician. We certainly need them, and for your advocacy for patients and your patient care. She's with the medical dermatological specialist in North Atlanta. Dr. Weissman.
Thank you so much for sticking it out and staying here and listening to this very important subject. So this bill strikes me as a very simple principle, and that is teamwork. Medicine has gotten increasingly complicated. I'm a third-generation doctor. Actually broke the mold because I have 2 brothers, but neither of them went into medicine. So my grandfather's a doctor, my father's a doctor, I'm a doctor, all 3 different kinds. So we tried to break the mold a little there. When I talked to my father, when I took immunology, and I was telling him about what I learned and about some of these new medications that are available. He said, "What language are you speaking?" What he learned was this didn't exist when he was in medical school, and when my grandfather was in medical school, I think they had just discovered the white blood cell. So it's exciting, it's fun, it's a great time. As you just heard from Kerry, we can make dramatic changes in our patients' lives with the use of these medications. So it's really, I mean, what does a doctor want to do? We want to make our patients better. What does a pharmacist want to do? They want to make the patients better. What does a nurse want to do? We're all in this together. We just need to take a minute and communicate with each other. We talk about these drugs being similar, and the FDA set a strict standard. They want them pretty much 99% similar. When I was walking my St. Bernard this morning and I ran into my friend who has a Lhasa Apso, I thought, our dogs are 99% similar. But they're very different. That 1% can make a big difference, and this is why we need this legislation, because that 1% may not be different at all, but in some cases it can be different, and of course the physician, nurse practitioner, the physician assistant, whoever is going to be responsible for that patient's care really needs to know what's going on. You've heard already, the medicine is expensive, and anything that helps us get these medications to our patients is a good thing. So none of us are opposed to biosimilars. Of course, some of the people who make the brands are actually going to be in charge of making the biosimilars because they're very difficult to make. And so they're the ones who have the apparatus in place. This isn't a turf war. This is, again, going back to the idea of teamwork. So we're happy that these things are coming out. The physicians are happy, the patients are happy, the advocacy groups are happy, as long as we can do them safely. So here's one of the problems. Every one of you, by the way, makes a monoclonal antibody. You made one when you were 2 months old when you got your tetanus shot. So these monoclonal antibodies are not made by giving human beings tetanus shots. They are made in a laboratory, and they're very difficult to make. But if I take an antibody out of you, sir, and I put it in your neighbor, that may be fine. But your neighbor's body may say, that's not my antibody, and I don't want it in me. And this is where we run into problems when we change medications out. If I get a call, actually I got a call at midnight last night from a patient who was in the emergency room. That's not the phone call I like to get, but through the grace of the internet, I can log on and know exactly what's going on with my patient. I need to know what that patient is on. Patient happens to be on a biologic medication. And if the patient has had a substitution of the medication, there are one of two possibilities here. They're having a flare of their disease. The disease is no longer controlled. And as people have alluded to before, we don't use these for a skinned knee or strep throat. We use this for multiple sclerosis. We use it for severe rheumatoid arthritis. We use it for life-threatening anemia, leukemias in some cases. So these are not diseases that we take lightly. And we really need to know what's going on with the patient so we can tell them, okay, I think what's going on is their disease itself is the problem, or I think what's going on is perhaps the medication they're on is a problem. And one thing that we don't always talk about is we don't 100% know everything about a medication when it comes to market. So the FDA has been very strict. We have mandatory reporting of complications of these medications. If a patient comes in, even if it's not a biologic that I prescribe, but I'm the one who diagnoses the melanoma, that has to be reported so we can keep track of what's going on. And again, this is going to be really confusing if we don't know exactly what this patient is on. Is it a Lhasa Apso or is it St. Bernard? We need to know so that we can make sure we're keeping our patients safe. So in summary, I guess what I want to say is it's an exciting time to be a doctor. The medications have revolutionized the way we've treated diseases. Patients like Kerry, who were crippled before, are now riding their bike on the Silver Comet Trail. We have a whole new language to speak and a whole new approach of ways to treat these. In the past, actually, we used to, I hate to say this, but when I was a resident, when we wanted to treat someone with serious psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis, there's a little bit of gallows humor at Grady Hospital sometimes, and we would say, which do you like more, your liver or your kidneys? We don't have to make those choices anymore. The biologics have really changed that. We want to make sure that our patients, if their disease is controlled, they don't have to go back into that dark place of having the disease again. And if, heaven forbid, there's a complication of the disease, we can take the best approach possible to manage that complication and keep them healthy, keep them and help them be there when their children get married, when they have grandchildren, and when they get to go on that cruise they've been saving up for. I will take questions.
One or two questions for Dr. Weissman? Dr. Weissman, what? No questions? Sure.
Dr. Weissman, you're a dermatologist, right?
Yes.
What specifically do you prescribe these types of medications for? What disease processes as being a dermatologist?
Okay, I don't know how many of you watch Seinfeld, but there was that famous episode of Pimple Popper, MD. So not for acne, but we do see patients with severe psoriasis where they're covered head to toe. We see patients with severe eczema, again, covered head to toe. And these patients have serious consequences of their disease. Again, I just had to hospitalize a patient with eczema because his heart was pumping so hard that his heart was starting to fail. So this is a small fraction of the patients that we see. It's a very tiny fraction of the prescriptions that the pharmacies are filling. But when we go to spend, in some cases, if it's a Medicare patient, the taxpayer money or Blue Cross Blue Shield's money, we don't do it lightly. They're very expensive. The other disease that's really been revolutionized is metastatic melanoma, which until recently, when I was a resident, was invariably a killer. But now there's a new agent called ipilimumab that can have a 20% complete response rate, and patients can be cured.
So wouldn't it be fair to say that you may be in dermatology, but you're taking care of patients who have other disease processes that you're consulting on, so you have to know about the biologics because of that? Is that not true?
Oh, absolutely. So you may see a patient, some of these biologics actually increase the risk of skin cancer, and conversely, some of the biologics may increase the risk of multiple sclerosis. So I may be using the biologic, and then I'm sending to a colleague because I'm concerned that a patient's got some complaints or some symptoms that may be a side effect of the biologic, and conversely, the same may come to me. Right. Is this a good mole? Is this a dangerous mole? What are we going to do about it? And it really does matter because the side effects vary from biologic to biologic. And even within, we've got biologics that sort of do the same thing. They block the same protein, but even within that category, blocking the exact same protein, the side effects can vary within that category.
Dr. Weissman, I will tell you that the Republicans have a beloved member who is suffering from a melanoma and being treated from that. And the first thing I'm going to do when I see him tomorrow is ask him if he's taking a biologic. And if he's not, if things don't go well, I'll be dragging him to your office to be seen. And I'm not violating HIPAA because he will tell you that he's being treated. So thank you for that information that I didn't know. And with your comparison of the little tiny dog and the St. Bernard, if you have that attitude when you treat patients, I'm sure you bring a smile to their face. Thank you very much for presenting today. And to sum up and get us out at 3 o'clock, which I've been trying very hard to do, 4 o'clock, we got pushed back. Mr. Allen.
I have 1 minute. Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Chair. We hope that we took a complex issue and helped to explain its importance to you. While it is a complex issue, the answers we think in this industry are simple, and that is promote innovation, get products to the patients, and we're seeing some amazing strides already. You've heard some of those stories today. We'll hear many more in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all our presenters. I'm sure they'll be here, and maybe for a little while afterwards if somebody wants to say something to them. I want to thank all my members for coming and staying. This has been a great turnout. And Senator Unterman?
I express the same. I appreciate the Senate Health and Human Services. I know this is a very complicated issue, but I think at first brush it seems complicated, but the more you understand it, the easier it becomes. So I appreciate y'all's attendance today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you. Sure.
Wait.
Mike, just a minute. Chip, is it on? You got him on? You may be sitting on rules. Somebody hand him another mic.
Nope.
Representative Hardin, if this is going to be a discussion that we'll have when the bill comes out, can we wait till then? Representative Hardin, I'll be glad to talk to you about the bill. There's one coming with the Senate, but I will tell you that we are following examples, and there have been discussions between physicians and pharmacists all over this country who've worked out this model legislation, and we are going on that, and that's what was being presented in all the states. So,
yeah, Madam Chairman, I guess on follow-up from Representative Hardin, is there, I guess for many of us, it's the first or second time we've heard about this, and,
right.
and the regulations, it seemed like there would be a federal guideline.
Well, as the
Because the
feds,
interrelation between the drugs and people that would kind of guide us on how we should notify.
Representative, this is an issue where they sort of give the broad guidelines and they let the states, they don't take away our states' rights for us to decide how we do. Well, no, maybe the second. So thank you again for coming, and I appreciate it.